Thanks for joining us on 90s Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi. You probably heard about Prop HH. It is widely considered to be the top issue on this year's ballot. Of course, election night on November the 7th coming up here, and it's a little bit complicated in terms of Prop HH. So complicated, in fact, that the Colorado Blue Book that's sent out to all of you, it takes 12 pages to describe exactly what Prop HH is. But thankfully, we've got 90s politics guy Marshall Zelinger here with us to break it down in a little less than 12 pages. Well, I hope so.
I thought I joked when I did my first story that it was going to take me multiple stories, and then finally I did one. I think it was 2 minutes 15 seconds, and I don't know that I think I covered enough of the bullet points, but certainly not all of them.
Not all of them. Okay, so let's get into those bullet points. What exactly is Prop HH, and why is it so important?
What is it? It depends who you ask, but the gist is your property tax is going to increase next year, period. Prop HH reduces that increase a little bit by utilizing TABOR refunds that you get if the state collects too much money. I'll get into that in a second. So your property tax increase is minimized. It still goes up, just not as much, which means if you're in a higher property value home, you benefit from the dollar amount more than if you have a lower property value home. The legislature also tied into the passage of Prop HH another bill that takes effect if you vote yes and it passes. This other bill that makes everybody's TABOR refund the same next year, that takes effect. So I think it's $898 for everyone, no matter your income level. Double that if you file jointly. If Prop HH fails, your TABOR refund is based on your income level. So the lower income you are, the less TABOR refund you're going to get. The higher income you are, the more TABOR refund you're going to get. So HH impacts your property tax, and it will impact your TABOR refund specifically for next year and in future years, because what your property tax doesn't go up if Prop HH passes, the state has promised special districts, local governments, places that normally get your property tax money. The state has promised, we'll give you some or all, depending on which district we're talking about. We'll give you some money back to backfill what you were supposed to get, but the only way the state can do that is by increasing the amount that the state is allowed to keep and spend every year, which then impacts your TABOR refund. I know I'm talking in circles right now. So basically, what you're voting on is for the state to be able to keep and spend more money every year, because every other aspect of Proposition HH does not require a vote of the people. The thing that requires a vote of the people is that the state needs to use the TABOR refund money to backfill some of these other areas if it's going to change the math equation for your property tax. And the only way the state can play with your TABOR money is by getting your permission to keep and spend some of it. And that's essentially why you're voting on it, is to give the state permission to grow its budget from here to here. Over time, it's going to increase every year if HH passes, and that money would normally be refunded back to voters if there was a TABOR refund that year.
And those refunds would not be equal across the board.
No, and the only reason they're equal is if HH passes, and I asked the governor this in our debate, skeptical or cynical. 62% of voters, based on the math of your income level, 62% would benefit if your TABOR refund was equal, meaning you would get more money for 62% of the people. 38% would get less TABOR refund money, but only if Prop HH passes. So I asked the governor in our debate 2 weeks ago, why are you dangling this in front of voters? I mean, 62%. You only need 51%, 50% plus one to win a ballot issue. It's clear to me, like, they didn't need to do this tied to Prop HH. If the legislature really wanted everyone to have the same dollar amount in the TABOR refund, they could do it, just like the year before, last year, when we all got TABOR refunds just before the election, and it was a check in the mail with the governor's letter and signature. TABOR refunds can be played with by the legislature. And the fact that they can make it equal, again, that's not what you're voting on. They could do that whether you vote yes or no. They've just tied it to a yes vote. Skeptical or cynical, is it because the majority of the people who would get more money would then be incentivized to vote yes?
Fascinating number of fronts. Before we kind of get into more of those deeper issues, who's for it and who's against it? You mentioned that you spoke with Governor Jared Polis, and that was during the debate that you moderated a few weeks ago.
Generally, Democrats are for it. I did talk with State Senator Joanne Janal from Fort Collins, who is the only state lawmaker who I have talked with that is outspoken against it, and she didn't like the way it came about in the final days of the legislature. So all of this happened in the last 3 days of the state legislature in May that put it on the ballot, and it got introduced late. There weren't robust hearings. So anyways, Democrats put it on the ballot. Governor Paulus supports it, put it on the ballot. Republicans in the state house walked out when it came time to vote on this in the last days of the legislature, in part because they didn't like the speed of how this was happening. They didn't like that they didn't get input. Not that it would have mattered. Even if they would have had their input heard by the other lawmakers, the vote still would have been the same. And not that it doesn't matter in terms of the outcome. From a policy and a procedure standpoint, it certainly matters, but from the outcome, it wasn't going to matter whether Republicans had half a day to talk about this or 2 weeks to talk about it. The vote was still going to end up being the same. Conservatives are against it because it impacts Tabor. Local governments, all the local government associations, Colorado Municipal League, which advises cities, municipalities, and towns, they're against it. Colorado Counties, Inc., which advises counties, they're against it. And the Special Districts Association, which advises fire districts, library districts, parks districts, basically everything if you ever look at your property tax bill, all the things your property tax goes toward, all those special districts, that association is against it. And the reason those groups are against it is because it limits, it's the state telling these local areas, your money is now limited based on our decision. So if you vote yes on HH, it limits how much those districts can, it's going to lower what those districts would have received otherwise. Now there's an argument that says they're getting more regardless of whether HH passes or fails, so who cares if it's a little bit less? They're against it because they're like, this should be a local decision. And for certain counties, the large metro area counties are never going to be reimbursed 100% from the state. And what I mean by reimbursed is, if you vote yes on HH, let's say your property tax is here, it would have gone to here, and you vote yes, and it's here instead, the state is going to use Tabor refund money to reimburse local governments and districts the money that should have been there had Prop HH failed. But local governments from the large counties, Adams, Arapahoe, things like that, they're not going to get that. They're not going to get 100% of that. They're going to get 65% of that up to a certain point, and then never get it after that. There's one other aspect of why local government's against it, is because it puts something called truth in taxation, requiring if you as a local government want to keep and spend more after HH, if you want to keep and spend more than HH allows you to, you're supposed to, you don't have to put it to a vote of the people, but you have to hold a public hearing and tell the people, let the people speak, and let them tell you why maybe they don't want you to keep that money. But then it's the board will vote, the lawmakers you had elected, county commissioners, city council, they'll vote and decide whether to keep this overage that exists after HH but doesn't exist now. And now I think I'm losing people. I'm even losing myself. But just that's why local governments are against it. School districts are for this probably, and I know school groups, school associations, and nonprofits that spend money on ballot issues. School groups are for this because it really funds school education, because for 15 years the state has never funded school districts fully. And I'll try to simplify this, and I know I might be losing people still. Your local property taxes fund your school district. There's a math equation that tells school districts this is how much we're supposed to get. So if your property taxes only get the school district to here, the state has been responsible for filling this much money. But the state has never had enough money, I shouldn't say enough money, but the state has never provided enough money to schools to 100% fill that gap. This would help that gap be filled 100% and set aside more money in a different fund for school districts. So school districts, in a way, will win in the end, but using your Tabor refund money to fill that pot.
Well, you had the debate last month. We talked about this as well with Governor Jared Polis. Tell us about the debate and what maybe some of your top takeaways were from it.
I mean, I thought a couple key takeaways were that Governor Polis kind of distanced himself from this proposal, saying like, well, the legislature put this on the ballot. And when I asked him what his backup plan is, it's like, well, whatever the legislature can come up with, as though he's not the key player in the room telling the legislature, this is what I'll sign or this is what I want to see. Like, that's ridiculous to think that, in essence, the top Democrat in the state is just taking a hands-off approach. So that was a takeaway for me. Like, I mean, it's one thing to say I don't have a backup plan because you don't want to tell voters, well, you don't want to give voters a reason to vote no on something you support. And if you lead and lend to the idea that maybe I have something in my pocket, maybe that's going to push people, well, if you got something different, why am I voting on this one? Like, I get, in a way, to not admit that you have a backup plan, but also to be like, well, it's whatever the legislature does. That was surprising. I did get him to admit, essentially, that this is, he said in not so many words that he's okay not having Tabor refunds in the future because it means the state's collecting too much money. And he's always said, let's reduce the income tax. Well, if you reduce the income tax for everybody, that eats into the Tabor refund. And let's just take a quick step back. Tabor refunds mean the state collected money that you should have kept because it collected too much money. And so it's not like, here's a bonus. We're getting money back that the state's been holding on to that we should have never given up in the end. And so for him to say, like, I don't think we should have a Tabor refund, everyone's can probably get on board with that. That's a conservative idea. Some Democrats can get on board with that because it just means I get to keep the money that the state never needed in the first place because they took in too much and then refunded it back to me. So that was one thing. And then from the opposition side, that the idea that Michael Fields, one of the key No on HH committee members, brought out that point from the governor that he was surprised. Like, you can't tell me that the legislature runs the show and you're just there to see what happens. But also, like, he's well funded. The committee is well funded against No on HH, but it's dark money groups. And when I asked about it, then it became like, well, that's a whole other issue if we want to talk about, truth in committees and in politics. That's a different discussion from Prop HH, and the rules are set up this way. So it's one thing to preach transparency and to say, Governor, you truly have a backup plan or something like that, or I can't believe that you only say the legislature is going to give you something and you have no idea. But for him to also be like, I'm not going to tell you who's giving us money to fight it when we know it's liberal groups and school groups that are fighting for it, that's something I wish we could have gotten out of the no side, like who really is behind the no effort.
Do we have any polling or insight about which way, whether yes or no vote may be more favored?
No, it was months ago where the Magellan Strategies group, David Flaherty's polling group out of Louisville, did a poll that found HH. This was like soon after it passed the legislature, so this is outdated. But it was HH was passing, but the more people got educated of it through that poll and through the survey that was taking place, whether it was online or over the phone, by the end of that survey, it swayed people against it. And the conclusion was the more people are educated about it, the more they're willing to vote no. But on the surface, if they're just told this is property tax relief, meaning your increase is decreased a little bit, and also depending on your income level, it impacts your Tabor refund. Your inclination might be to vote yes, but then the more you learn about it, some more people than not started to sway no. I have always believed if something's confusing, you're either going to skip it or you vote no. But if you just read the 3 lines or 4 lines that are in the ballot, it doesn't give the same context we've just spent 10, 15 minutes talking about. And it sounds rosier in the writing than it really is if you get into the nuance. And the one thing that really bothers me about how it's written is it doesn't talk about, it says, we want to reduce, I forget how the phrasing is, if it's reduce property taxes, but it talks about property taxes, and then toward the end it says, by using the state surplus under the Prop HH cap. But it doesn't say, so it gives the impression like we're just going to use extra money to backfill. But it doesn't say, when you vote yes, you have raised the surplus level that we're allowed. And so there's just, it doesn't give the full story if all you're doing is reading what's on your ballot. And I hope people don't just read what's on your ballot and vote based on that. I think you need to read the Blue Book. You need to see some of our coverage. And like you said, like you started, 12-page Blue Book that's a lot. When something takes that many pages to describe, it's it's complicated.
That's hard for the average viewer or voter to digest, honestly. Now, I guess Prop HH, as we talked about, kind of probably the main thing. What else is on the November ballot of note, perhaps statewide?
I mean, there's only one other statewide ballot issue, Prop II, which I'll just make a quick relation to Prop HH. Prop II's ballot question starts without raising taxes because it's a real Tabor question, and so it catches your eye a little bit. But basically, 3 years ago, when voters passed Prop EE to fund preschool through increase in tobacco taxes, cigarette taxes, and creating a new nicotine, like a vape tax, the Blue Book 3 years ago gave an estimate for how much that would generate in the first year. The Blue Book underestimated by like $23 million. And because state law is written the way it is, or I think it's in the Constitution, the state can't keep that money unless it asks the voter one more time. So essentially, Prop II, you already kind of voted on it, but the state generated too much money from what you voted on. And so this is, hey, remember that thing you voted on 3 years ago? We need your permission to keep the money we hadn't anticipated it generating. And if you vote no, and if you vote yes, it goes toward universal preschool. If you vote no, it gets refunded. That $23 million gets refunded back to cigarette and tobacco wholesalers, and the sales tax that you approved 3 years ago, the higher nicotine and tobacco sales tax, has to be reduced in the future so that that extra money that wasn't accounted for, that if you vote no on Prop I, you're rejecting, that has to get lowered so that that overage doesn't continue into the future. So it's really a universal preschool question and a sin tax, and voters in Colorado seem to approve sin taxes. It's about tobacco, cigarettes, and nicotine. And so it's, do you want to allow the state to keep this extra money that was generated from something you already voted on, or do you think, no, they should have been, their estimate should have been better 3 years ago, and give it back?
Okay, so you got Prop HH, Prop II, and I guess as we head into November, we're obviously until November the 7th, I would imagine there's also some local races as well. Are there any key ones to pick out?
Aurora is electing a mayor. Mike Hoffman's up for re-election, and Democratic Socialist on the other side, Juan Marcano. I mean, a very extreme to the left. You've got Kaufman on the right, a very extreme on the left candidate as his competition. That's one race to watch. Any of the school board races, for sure. You've got Denver School Board up for election, where there are seats that are, union candidates versus reform candidates. Same thing in Cherry Creek and Douglas County. The school boards are usually on the off-year election cycle. There are a few cities. I did a story on Fort Collins, Golden, and I think it's Castle Pines. It's either Castle Rock or Castle Pines that are voting on property tax increases. So we talk about Prop HH lowering the increase in your property tax. Fort Collins, Golden, and then, like I said, one of those other ones, Castle Rock or Castle Pines, have something on the ballot where they're asking to increase the city's portion of the property tax. But I'm conflating it in my head now. I think Golden's is for the fire department, so that money would fund the fire department. Fort Collins's would fund, I'm going to get it wrong because it changed. It's either, I think it's homelessness. It was either parks or homelessness, and I'm just going to say go to 9news.com and check out my story on that because I'm messing it up because it was one thing before it got put on the ballot, and then it changed to something on the ballot.
Well, one thing is for sure. It's too late to mail in your ballot. You have until 7 p.m. to turn in your ballots on Tuesday, November the 7th. So go out and vote. Obviously, it is an off-year election, but sometimes these have very big consequences and impacts on your day-to-day life, right, Marshall?
I have always said you cannot, can I use the B word?
Yeah.
You cannot bitch unless you vote. Disagree with me, fine. You can turn in your ballot blank, and it counts as you voted. No race is going to be counted as one for one or one for the other, but it will count that you voted and had your say. Okay, turn it in blank. If things are too confusing, try to understand, but I don't know. Sitting on it or throwing it out or shredding it versus turning it in blank, I think I'd rather you turn it in blank because then it shows, well, I looked, I didn't like it, I didn't understand it, here, take my 0 vote back. Or check out some of our coverage try to get as educated as you can about it and how it would impact you if that's how you want to vote, or if how it's going to impact an industry, school, government, whatever sways you. You've got time still to know enough to at least circle one of the boxes.
9news.com for all the coverage and some of the insight, as you were talking about a second ago. You got till 7 p.m. on Tuesday to turn in your ballot. Again, no mailing. You got to go do it in person, but it's pretty.
You can drop it off. You can drop it off in the ballot box too. Like find it. We've got them on 9news.com. GoVoteColorado.org. I want to say.
Let's go, yeah.
And you could drop it off at your ballot box, drop box until 7 p.m. They will. I've seen them shut it on someone. If you're walking up to the drop box at 7 and like 30 seconds, you're not getting it in. But you have time to either drop it off in person, drop it off at the box, drop it off. And I know it's an off year, and people aren't that attracted to elections in off years because there's not a president, there's not a governor. But like these are the decisions that legitimately impact your street. When you leave the garage and you get on your street, what you vote on in an odd year is like, is my street getting plowed? Well, I don't know, because I didn't vote on this thing that actually impacted the budget of my local government.
There you go. 9 News politics guy Marshall Zelinger, thanks for joining us and also for explaining all this, I suppose, complicated Prop HH.
I might have made it more complicated, but you can rewind, or you can like start this section over again and try again.
Thanks, Marshall. Appreciate it.